Okay, so let's talk about gluten and why it's important you understand a lot more about it, particularly with the foods that you're eating. And it's a bit of a dilemma at the moment because it's everywhere, and we'll talk more about it and how you can manage it. So I'm going to explain what gluten is, and I want to talk about the differences between an intolerance and a true allergy because they are quite different. We'll cover just briefly the role of your tummy because if you understand that, that's why a lot of the symptoms arise from gluten intolerance. Irritable bowel syndrome, which affects 1 in 5 people, which is very common. And often with irritable bowel syndrome, we actually, or medicos don't come up with a cause, but I'll guarantee when they come into the Health Queen clinic, we usually find out that it's usually gluten that's driving their constipation / diarrhea, bloating, or dairy or some other food. We're going to talk about how you can test to see if you do have a true gluten sensitivity and just some treatments. So just to give you a little bit of a background about what gluten is and where it comes from certain grains. Now, grains are grasses, so they typically, we came out of the caves about 12,000 years ago where meat was quite the staple diet, as well as the occasional herbs and leaves that were picked off trees. The problem with that was that meat supply would depend on the kill of the day, and if there wasn't a kill, then there was no food, or there was just a few leaves off trees. And the other issue with meat, of course, particularly back in those days, is there was no fridge to keep the meat, so it would go off and go rancid very quickly. So discovering grains from grass seeds was quite a revolution, and it really saw the advent of what's called the agricultural years, and people came out of the caves. They went into the flats and the plains in Egypt and all around those areas and started to grow crops. Now, what the crop growing meant was that food could be pretty much taken from the crop, stored where it wouldn't go off. A percentage does, but usually it was fairly, if it was kept dry, it wouldn't go off. And they could crush it down or mill it to create flour anytime they wanted. And suddenly man worked out, or humans worked out, how to have a constant supply of food. And this obviously was great because it helped prevent the famines and all the other things that man really had been subservient to up until then. So grains can be used to make a meal or a flour. And if you think of corn is actually a grain, and corn is turned into cornmeal or polenta or semolina. It's used for tacos, nachos, all those frioles, all the Mexican types of foods. In Africa, the cornmeal is used as the staple part of the meal, and to that, if there's any meat hanging around, that'll become the secondary part of the meal. Similarly, things like wheat, rye, barley, sorghum, millet, oats, fonio, amaranth, quinoa, spelt are all different types of grains which can be milled down to create a flour. Now, the beauty of once you've got that milled good or that flour is you can make flatbreads, breads, pastas, couscous, reconstruct it however you like, and generally these things, once they're done, will last a lot longer as well. So there's just some examples of things that we probably all know and love well. This is a good example though, just here to show you what the grass looks like. And they're the seeds on top of the grass or the grains, and that's it loose, and then we crush it up into flour obviously, and then we make the produce after it. Now, many products are made from grains, and interesting, when we look at the actual grain itself, what happened in the 60s was there was a food shortage, and Nixon, who was president of the United States through the 60s, said, guys, farmers, if you can help us with our food shortage, because population has boomed, and if you can produce a grain that doesn't take 2 years to grow, that takes 2 weeks to grow, fantastic, we can feed the masses a lot quickly, and that will help us get out of this pickle, which is a food shortage. So what the farmers went and did was they went to the labs and they designed grains that would grow a lot quicker. Now, in order for that to occur, a grain needs a food source initially to inject into it so it can sprout. And gluten is the protein part of the grain, and they found by manipulating that and making that more of the grain that the sprout would occur quicker and faster and stronger. So that is kind of where gluten took off. Gluten's always been a part of certain grains, in particular wheat, rye, barley. We can find it in oats, and spelt is a type of wheat, so it's often in there as well. But it's just the component of the grain that is the protein section that helps the grain sprout. And because things have been modified in the last 30 years, we're finding that gluten is more of the grain than it ever used to be. The problem is that with this is that gluten is very difficult to break down. And in Latin it means glue, which means it just sticks to everything, and it does. It sticks to the gut wall, and for a lot of Caucasians, they just can't break it down. So they end up with undigested food matter that goes through their gut. Now, if you know anything about immunology, if you've been to any of my talks before or sat in front of me, you'll know that the gut is where most of your immune system is. So if something's going through there, undigested and unbroken down, it's going to create immune stimulation. And your body will decide rapidly whether the thing agitating it is food or a virus or a bacteria. Now, if it gets a little bit confused, as in the case of gluten, it will treat it like a virus and a bacteria. And it does activate your immune system. This picture I love because it demonstrates really well about gluten, and you can see gluten is actually, if any of you have made paper mache before, it's that you can turn flour into glue and use it for paper mache because of this stuff here. So gluten is the jelly part or the glue bit in between the fibres, and it makes things very sticky, hence why paper mache works as a flour works as a glue in the case of paper mache. But in this instance here, what we also do with gluten is high pressurise something like this, so stretch out a bit of activated flour, put some high pressured water behind it, and we push the gluten out of the product. We then go and use that for thickening for other things such as sauces or powder mixes or chicken tonights or whatever it is. Now, just back to the immune system. So an allergy is actually what occurs when your immune system's so activated that it thinks it's under attack, and it sets off antibodies throughout your body. Often, though, people will have a sensitivity to gluten, but not a full-blown allergy. And I do try and explain to people it's not black and white, it's a spectrum of greys in between. So you might be on one side of the spectrum and have absolutely no problem with gluten at all, or you might be on the extreme opposite where you have absolute allergy, which brings you to your knees and makes you extremely sick with crippling pains and starts to damage your body, which is called celiac disease, or you're going to be like most people, and that's somewhere in between. So these things are on the increase, and interesting, in 2010, 90% of food consumed in the USA and bought in the USA was packeted and processed. So it wasn't fresh. So it wasn't fresh vegetables and fruit, and it wasn't fresh meat. So 90% of the food over there is processed, and gluten is the main thing used in those foods. It's used as a flavour enhancer. It's used to thicken things because our palate, we're used to, thick and white sauce. So instead of making it from plain old flour, butter and milk, we just rip open a packet with some milk extract and gluten, and voila, we've got a white sauce. But it's really laced with gluten. Grains, we've talked about that. So symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome are interesting because you'd think because you're eating it, it's only going to affect your gut, but that's not the case. Gluten will affect your stomach, it can affect your skin, and it can affect your brain or your head and nervous system. Often we'll see nutrition deficiencies coming through as secondary problems. So iron and calcium deficiency symptoms, which I'll go through shortly, are also really common features of gluten intolerance. But if we just isolate the tummy problems, what I commonly hear, and people with gluten sensitivities will tell you, that they can vacillate between having diarrhea one day to constipation. And that the constipation for them can flip in the day. So they might have bread for breakfast, like 2 pieces of toast. By the afternoon, they feel like they're 3 months pregnant and they're fluffing or they've got reflux. And when they go to the loo, it's pebbly. You can get tummy cramps, you can get random cramps, you can get urgency, you can get this feeling of nausea, and certainly flatulence is quite common. Interesting, in your skin, you can get this keratosis pilaris, this one here, which is that fine vesicle bumps on your skin, which are like little red bumps. They're not, it's not acne, it's just you rub your hands over and it's quite fine little red spots. You can get cracks in your mouth, and you can get ulcers in your mouth as well. Develop acne, pimples or eczema, and it can lead to vitamin D deficiency. If we look at what happens in the head, Kids have problems concentrating. They get quite, I watch my kids and they just cannot focus after having gluten. They can get hyperactive, or just children in general, not just my kids, can become very nervous system stimulated, so they just become quite ratty. Grown-ups, certainly I know in the Health Queen Clinic we've got lots of people here who have mood changes, so they can get quite depressed after bread, or there's this sense of addiction, so they'll have a piece of bread and then they'll want to go back for more and more and more. You can get migraines and headaches, you can get vague, you can get dizzy, you can feel a bit disconnected and a bit, all very common symptoms. Now, just on that, you don't need all of those to tick the box saying you're gluten sensitive. You might only just have the dizziness after you have bread, and that will be enough to know that you're gluten sensitive. The longer term side effects tend to come from the damage that's being done by gluten in your gut. And what it does is it breaks down the little villi, which are these very delicate projections that come into your small intestine where you absorb iron and calcium. So the subtler signs in long-term deficiency include lethargy, so that people become really tired and flat, demotivated, they can't be bothered doing anything, they can get short of breath when they exercise, pale skin, these thing called floaters, which are like little smudges that bounce around in your eyes. They're symptoms of anemia, which is low iron. Symptoms of low calcium can include chalky teeth, so they can start to break or snap, or you lose fillings, poor enamel, you can get bone weakness, osteoporosis, you can get fractures, you can get weak muscles, you can get palpitations from low calcium, and spasm as well, cramps. Generally people can lose weight or gain weight, and it can be a side effect of infertility, can actually be caused by gluten sensitivity. So how do we diagnose it? And really I don't believe that medicine does it that well, like going down the medical path, mainly because I've had plenty of patients who turn up here who are celiac or gluten deficient and they haven't been picked up by mainstream medicine. Now, some people are non-celiac gluten intolerant, and it is very prevalent. So that means that they are intolerant to gluten, but they're not showing the antibodies. So 1 in 7 people, and this was a couple of years ago, this information, are gluten sensitive and suffer from similar symptoms. So they can be tested and come up negative or inconclusive. That doesn't mean that they're not on their way to becoming celiac and full-blown allergy victims as such. So what I suggest to people, actually we'll just go into other ways of testing. So you can do a skin prick or a RAS test, which is a blood test. That can also give you false negatives. Food allergy test, I do that in the clinic, not cheap, but really accurate, and that gets sent away to America and we get the result back, and it is your information, it's very accurate. Elimination diet I found is also just as good. So it can be tricky though, because gluten's quite addictive, but if you can knock it out of your diet for a week or even a month and you lose weight, or you feel better, or your bowels return to normal, or your skin clears up, there's your answer. Internal visualization, that's really pretty much what doctors do nowadays. They go straight from, I've got a sore upset tummy, to colonoscopy, which is costing lots of money, but they'll stick a tube down your front end or a back end and just see if there's any irritation. Pretty much what they're looking for, though, front end is damage as celiac disease. Unfortunately, that does not pick up these subtler sensitivity cases. It'll only pick up full-blown disease. So what's the treatment? Pretty much the treatment is to get yourself off gluten and avoid foods that contain gluten, so wheat, rye, barley products, even rolled oats, things that have thickeners and agents where you know the product turns thick. They will have gluten in them. Soy sauce if you're celiac. If you are celiac, you really need to look up a comprehensive list of what contains gluten, because it is quite extensive. It's used in malt drinks, Milo, lots of things. I use herbals to switch off the immune response, and you will need to see someone specialist in this area. Western medicine just tends to put people on steroids, but there are lots of herbals that do the job efficiently and don't put your body at risk, and that's good for a little while, just to calm your body down. Look at some probiotics and just helping your gut get back on track and become healthy again. So how do you eat gluten-free? And I come across this all the time. Beware of anything that's processed. So if something comes in a packet or a lid, a jar, anything like that where you've got it's not fresh, then you've got to suspect that there's going to be gluten in there. So remember I was saying it's used in thickening things. It can come in soups, soy sauces, it comes in lollies, cold meats. So hams and deli meats all have gluten in them. Low and no fat products often use gluten because it creates a slipperiness on our tongue. This hydrolyzed vegetable protein, HVP, is used in gravies and different things like that. It also goes by soy vegetable protein. It is still a gluten derivative. Natural flavourings and MSG will also have gluten in them. So pretty much it forces you to go back to the old natural, shopping at markets, eating from farmers to your plate, which means salad to plate or steamed veggies to plate, or from the the butcher to your plate. So cleaning up, just having really simple foods is the easiest way around this. Beautiful salads, get inspired with colour. Get inspired by meats. If you want to be vegetarian, use all your protein, animal protein such as nuts and seeds. But it's really the safest way to go. That's all on the gluten sensitivity thing. If you do want to go ahead and test, just let me know and we can test you. Otherwise, the other thing I just want to say at this point is not all products that say gluten-free are good for you. So there's this little phenomena occurring at the moment where gluten-free products such as pancake, cookies, cake recipes, add water and stir type things are saying they're gluten-free. Well, why that's fabulous, they don't contain gluten. They do contain other things. So 415, 412, they're using a lot of gums, which can also have reactions in people. So I really don't know that the substitute in that case is better than the original product. If you like cooking and baked goods like shortbread, I urge you to cook from scratch. So get things like rice flour, soy flour, coconut flour, and just use your other products as per normal, but make sure they're a gluten-free product. And that's probably the safest way to go. Anyway, I hope that was useful.